Our next session is the penultimate session of the day, and it deals with the age-old topic of heart failure. The chairpersons of this session is Dr. Sukumar Ghosh, Dr. Shantanu Guha, Dr. Sonali Sarkar, and Dr. Shubho Datta. Moderating this session will be Dr. Soumitra Rai, and the expert panelists include Dr. Amit Mittal, Dr. Rana Rathore Roy, and Dr. Oriom Kaul. May I please request the chairpersons and the moderator, Dr. Soumitra Roy, to please start the proceedings for this session.
Hello, good evening, Dr. Soumitra.
Hello. So, is it the chairperson's take? Any chairperson want to give a?
Okay, I'm Dr. Sukumar Ghosh. I'm here.
Yes, Dr. Ghosh, please have a few seconds of introduction quickly,
Okay, already it is being discussed. Already described, announced that as we are running late, let us start the program directly. So, first speaker is Dr. Sunil Banerjee. The topic is on consensus impacting the treatment choice of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Dr. Banerjee, please.
please. I request all the speakers to stick to 8 minutes so that we have got 2 minutes for discussion. Please, kindly.
Dr. Roy, I do that. Please allow me to share.
Thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. We are able to see
You
your
are visible.
Okay, fine. So let me start. So this is an interventional program, but there is probably issues of intervention in heart failure also. Some structural things have come up, but those structural treatment, be it TAVI or mitral valve replacement or a tricuspid valve repair, this thing also needs to be accompanied by a good medical management. So my talk on today is the new consensus published in American College of Cardiology 2021. And what this is the consensus treatment and how it impacts on the treatment of choices of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Now, we know the burden of heart failure is enormously high and probably not disclosed properly, because you see here the estimate of incidence is from 1.3 to 223 million. So depending upon who are seeing the patients, the incidence differ. And hospital readmission is one of the key element for higher mortality. And the hospital readmission is definitely high in people who have suboptimal medical management, and in comparison to those who are getting a guideline directed medical therapy. And this is the curve which came in 2020 Indian Heart Journal, that the rate of death in hospital 1 month, 6 months is just coming up and up. So can we do something to improve it? Now, we have already a structured therapy in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. We are not in the gray zone anymore, and there is definite medicines which is supposed to be improving the mortality and morbidity. But the problem comes here when we see this graph. In last 30 years, we have so many inventions, starting from ACE inhibitor, ARB, ACE inhibitor, beta blocker, all are there. And when we see these graphs, we find that, okay, some of them may be chosen, not all of them, because they may be too overdose for the patients. And that's the problem of the therapeutic inertia. So my talk starts here today, that we wanted to emphasize on the quadruple therapy with a angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor, ARNI, or evidence-based beta blocker, MRA, that is either spironolactone or eplerenone. As of now, these two are available. Any of the SGLT2 inhibitor, mostly the empagliflozin and dapagliflozin. And if you combine all these things, remarkably, there is a 73% risk in death over 2 years. Now, we have a therapeutic inertia in initiating all these four. Let us recapitulate. There are physicians' prescription for other diseases combining the 4 drugs: tuberculosis, refractory hypertension, poorly controlled diabetes, even some connective tissue disorder, and patients suffering from malignancy. They need multiple drugs and not something vitamins or placebo in them. Coming again to the crux of the issues, that the 4 drug which has to be initiated in patient with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, which by different societies, it means a different thing, but all agree that less than 40% is the persons who needs the treatment effect. And they are the people who get the benefit. And presence of NT-proBNP high is there in ESC guideline when you have a 40 to 49% ejection fraction. But if you have a good clinical examination and assessment that this patient has a heart failure, you can just give them a designation that they are the people who are going to be benefited with the quadruple therapy. Now, what we start about? To achieve the maximum benefit of the GDMT in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction patient, therapy must be initiated and titrated in maximally tolerated dose. Target doses are associated with best outcome, and titration should occur even if the patient appears stable or the symptoms and or ejection fraction improve. And this is the only important line we have to remember, that although you find the patient is improving, you have to go on increasing the drug doses. Beta blocker doses should be adjusted every 2 weeks, and so there are some algorithm. Let's start with ARNI. Now, indication of ARNI in all patients with reduced ejection fraction and a symptomatic heart failure, except in patient who cannot have a ARNI, is who have a definite contraindication or who don't have access to that. And if you have a doubt that this patient is cannot take a high dose, you can start with 50 milligram twice daily. And if this patient previously on ACE inhibitor, give a drug holiday of 36 hours before you start it. Otherwise, there is a problem of precipitous hypotension, renal failure, and angioedema. Now, this is again when you cannot give ACE inhibitor and RB is contraindication and not toleration. It's we know all this, but more important in our country is people who cannot afford it, and in them you need to give either enalapril or ramipril, which I think we do it very regularly. And consider to increase the dose with a maximum dose as much as achieved with a 2-week interval. Monitor blood pressure, renal function, and potassium after initiating the and during up titration. What about beta blocker? Not atenolol, not nebivolol. It's only bisoprolol, carvedilol, and metoprolol succinate. You can choose any one of them. There is no hard and fast rule that which one is better and which is not good. And you need to understand one thing, that beta blocker being a negative chronotropic drug, you need to keep a close watch on the heart rate. And if you are giving a bisoprolol up to 10 milligram, carvedilol 25 milligram twice daily, or metoprolol up to 100 milligram, it is better that you check a periodic ECG to look for PR interval prolongation. But remember, bundle branch blocks or bifascicular block are not a contraindication for these drugs. And aldosterone antagonists and are frequently underutilized because of the chances of hyperkalemia, and we need to check these things regularly, and probably in very next few months we'll get some good answer to this treatment of hyperkalemia. Remember, the smaller dose of spironolactone you can give 12.5 milligram, but not the eplerenone. You have to give 25 milligram, not the half dose. And again, you have to update it in 2 to 3 weeks time. And the talk of the days are the SGLT2 inhibitor with a reduced ejection fraction of less than 40%, even patient without any diabetes. And they can be given in patient with an impaired renal function up to this limit, that is in dapagliflozin more than 30, and GFR more than 20 in empagliflozin. Now, this is a JAMA network analysis. This year it has come in. It's a very good one-page take-home message. What I discussed today is that CV death hospitalization is reduced 42% by ARNI. Initiate at low dose up to 7 to 14 days, continue, and then titrate as tolerated up. Maintenance of additional titration of the 4 foundation therapy is the key after 1.5 months. And
Please summarize, Dr. Banerjee.
Yeah.
Sir, we are running short of time, and
but my 8 minutes is over.
Yeah,
sir, it's over.
I'm not seeing the watch. It is
Okay,
not.
okay, fine. So you need to initiate all this drug, but all at least titrate up as soon as possible. There is certain things which need to be understood, that you don't give diuretic unnecessarily after the patient is doing well. If the patient needs more than 80 milligram of twice daily of furosemide, you need to give some metazolone, and patient who had say inadequate control of heart rate, you need to give ibabradine. And the general prohibition at the end is the medication adherence will only be given by a good patient education and cost-effective therapy. I end here. Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you. We have got about a minute. Do we have our panelists over here? Dr. Amit Mittal, Dr. Rana Rathore Rai, Dr. Orion Kaur? Anybody here? No. Then perhaps this time Dr. Shantanu Guha gives your comment of this 4x4 model within next half minute.
I'll rather want to ask one question to Shune.
Yes.
Dr. Banerjee,
Yes.
in your practice, in how many patients you start SGLT2 inhibitors in non-diabetics from the beginning?
Recently the number is increasing. Like I tell you very clearly that if the patient is not requiring a very high dose of diuretic, I skip furosemide and instead I give SGLT2 inhibitor. So this is my practice, but I don't give in patient who is less than 50 kgs of weight and whose hygiene cannot be maintained very clearly. If I understand very clearly.
The benefit of SGLT2 inhibitors in diabetics is definitely much more than in non-diabetics. Though in non-diabetics, they're also beneficial. Definitely, they are beneficial in both the subsets, but the quantum of benefit is more in diabetics. So I have seen...
Dr. Guha, numerically, the benefit is more in non-diabetics. If you go by the slides, numerically it is more, though not significantly.
That it is not significant.
Not significantly different.
Not significant, yeah.
But if anything, it is better in non-diabetic. That's funny.
Well, my question was to all the panelists and even to the moderator. The same question. In non-diabetic state, those who are not diabetic, we start that.
I start on everybody with ejection fraction below 40% if there is no contraindication. But I think we can go to the next topic, to Dr. Sharad Sheth on CKD and heart failure. Dr. Sheth, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
You can see my slides also?
Yes, very much.
Thank you very much for giving me this, inviting me to give this talk. And indeed, I would add to what Dr. Banerjee has already said, that I am on a very tough task of balancing the tight rope for initiation and continuation of heart failure, especially in CKD patients. Because between cardiologists and nephrologists is always a tussle that the creatinine is a harbinger and eGFR in optimizing the treatment of cardiac failure. Heart and kidney are very closely linked, they're crosstalk, and because there are cardiorenal connectors, RAS activation, oxidative stress, inflammation, sympathetic nervous system, they both affect heart and kidney together. So we have 5 cardiorenal syndromes, type 1 and 2, wherein acute or chronic cardiac failure would damage the kidney, and type 3 and 4, where acute and chronic kidney disease will damage the heart, and then both of them concomitantly fail together, and that is a cardiorenal concept. So for treating cardiac failure, we can't forget kidney, and we have to optimize the treatment, keeping eGFR and creatinine stable. So that's what I'm going to talk today. With renal heart failure, renal dysfunction, a clinical situation, because 40 to 60% of heart failure patients have concomitant chronic kidney disease. And it's vice versa, 40 to 60% of chronic kidney disease have cardiac failure. So much so that I lose almost 50% of my patients, even before they reach the stage of dialysis, they die of cardiac problem. And around 20 to 30% have acute cardiac or acute renal events. So the presence of heart failure reduces the probability of survival in kidney disease is very much less. So I would say between B and C, almost 5 to 7 out of 10 would end up with renal dysfunction, treating heart failure. So these are challenges in the initiation optimization of the heart failure therapy. So the renal dysfunction, which is an unwanted barrier with the heart failure therapy. We all know very well, the moment you start to optimize the treatment of heart failure, the biggest harbinger is creatinine and eGFR. We all know very well that RAS inhibitors have shown incremental benefit, quality of life, reduced hospitalization, and mortality events, especially with the ACE blockers. However, worsening of the renal function is the most common during heart failure treatment. And this leads to decreased survival, increased hospitalization, and increased disease prognosis. So the cause of worsening of renal function during a decompensation episode of heart failure needs careful thought, because majority of times it is a volume contraction, over diuresis. By giving a lot of diuretics should be curtailed, and we should try to optimize the use of RAS inhibitors and cut down the use of diuretics and prevent volume depletion to reduce worsening of the renal function. So these RAS inhibitors obviously have mortality and morbidity benefit. So ACE and ARBs increase the risk of mortality in heart failure because of worsening of the renal function. So should we stop ACE or ARB with worsening of the renal function, say CKD, advanced stages of CKD stage 4 and 5? This has been a hot topic there's an ongoing trial in Europe. Stop ACE inhibitors with CKD stage 4 and 5. And this is what this slide shows, this cartoon, that there is a samsara effect. If you stop RAS inhibitors, obviously you would end up with a rise in creatinine and potassium. But at what cost? Clinically, patient deteriorates and leads to further worsening of the renal failure. And hence, one should not stop RAS inhibitor even in advanced stages of CKD stage and 4, but we'll try to reduce the use of diuretics, avoid volume contraction to increase the risk of RAS inhibitor blockade. So at the cost of, it's a trade-off hypothesis, at the cost of little rise of creatinine and potassium, patient clinically improves by continuing RAS, ACE and ARBs and should not be stopped, it should be continued. We know very well that 30% of the rise of creatinine above the baseline creatinine that you started the therapy with is permissible, and it is still beneficial, it is still cardioprotective and renoprotective. But what should we have? Is there an unmet need? As RAS blockers and nephrotoxic drugs, we all know that it is a reversible worsening of the renal function. The moment you stop RAS blockers, the creatinine reduces and eGFR improves because it is not nephrotoxic. It's a hemodynamic effect, and they have a functional hemodynamic effect on renal function, because we all know RAS blockers, they dilate efferent arteriole, reduce intraglomerular pressure, and hence they reduce eGFR and increase the creatinine. So why is there a need for a newer therapy? Yes, there is an unmet need, because we all know, the previous speakers have said that out of 4 pillars, beta blockers, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, ARNI and SGLT2 blockers, we need to optimize all these drugs, especially ARNI. Now, ARNI has almost replaced the use of ACE and ARBs right from the word go. So novel heart failure regimens may play a key role in improving outcomes in CKD patients with heart failure, because unfortunately, 75% of the dialysis patients or CKD patients are undertreated. The goal-directed therapy they don't receive, and these under-prescribed patients have increased morbidity and mortality. So here we have a drug, combination of sacubitril valsartan. We all know very well that they have a counter-regulatory compensation, each system of them. I said earlier, RAS blockers who dilate efferent arteriole, reduce intraglomerular pressure. Well, here we have neprilysin blocker with increasing atrial natriuretic peptide, producing dilatation of the efferent arteriole. So the intraglomerular pressure neither reduces nor increases. It is optimized. So because neprilysin inhibitors have opposite effect of RAS blockers. They produce vasodilatation, they produce natriuresis, and they produce diuresis. And that is why they are renoprotective. So they both would reduce blood pressure, but once you have added neprilysin inhibitor, there is a better target organ protection. So the impact on renal function with the role of sacubital valsartan on renal function, we also hear all these trials, Paradigm, very remarkable trials, Paradigm HF, Paragon trial, Paramount, Pioneer, Prime, and lastly now UK HARP3 trial. UK HARP3, they are of the almost verge of thinking that we should stop ASARBs in CKD stage 4 and 5. But there is no stoppage of sacubital valsartan. There is 30% risk reduction of cardiovascular outcome with the use of sacubital valsartan. This would show very well there is a slower decline of eGFR when you use this as compared to enalapril. This was shown in Paradigm HF trial. So discontinuation of treatment with sacubital valsartan is very low, almost half than that of enalapril. 21% reduction in the heart failure hospitalization. My previous speaker said that sudden death, recurrent hospitalization are the bad things in cardiac failure management, heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So there is 30% reduction in ESRD in sacubital valsartan. So there is renal protection, cardio protection of a very great extent. Let's see a case here. Here we have a Shrusti. She had 5 years of CKD and 3 years of heart failure. And last 2 weeks, she was unable to do her daily chores and she had swelling of the feet and tiredness, showing that
Your time is over.
Yes, symptomatic this thing, and her GFR and LVF was low, and obviously she was put on sacubital valsartan combination, and direct ARNI is now recommended right in the hospitalized, when the patient hospitalized, not even before his discharge, the patient discharge. And the till 30 ml GFR optimum dose, there is no dose reduction required. When it is less than 30 ml, we start with the lower dose, but we can still go up and up because there is no risk of rising creatinine and potassium in ARNI. So the worsening of the eGFR is prevented, ESRD is prevented, the cardiac heart failure, optimization of treatment, and morbidity and mortality significantly goes down when you use sacubital valsartan as compared to ACE and ARB. So I would just summarize my talk by saying that stopping RAS inhibitors in patients with heart failure may lead to a repeated cycle of worsening of the renal failure. And though you may stabilize creatinine and potassium, but you would lose the patient out of cardiac deterioration and death. So one should not stop RAS inhibitors. And now we have a new kid on the block, that is ARNI, which is far better and RAS blocker. It saves life in reduced ejection fraction, heart failure, prevents worsening of the renal function, prevents worsening of the end-stage renal disease, prevents patient from going on dialysis, at the same time survives the patient of all morbidity and mortality. And in real-world scenario, as we've seen on this slide, in that patient, ARNI upfront use is always recommended, and probably the scenario will change. This will replace ACE and ARBs right from the day one. Thank you very much for the kind listening.
So Dr. Sheth, I think you have adequately emphasized that ARNI is better tolerated in renal failure patient than ACE inhibitor ARB in terms of hyperkalemia. Another important point I want to add, that even in Paradigm heart failure, it was shown that ARNI patients are more likely to continue with the MRA, whereas the enalapril patients were are less likely to continue with the MRA. And you know that MRA is as important as RAS blockade in case of heart failure. So that is another advantage of giving ARNI as the RAS blockade of choice, because you can have MRA as a companion. So for sake of time, I think I will ask the chairpersons to give their comment very quickly. Dr. Ghosh, please.
Okay, there is issue, let us be clear. So ARNI in treatment of renal status is never a contraindication. So the comment make a comment like that. The renal function status is not to be contraindication, to be taken as a contraindication.
I've been using it even on my dialysis patients.
Yeah, that's the thing what we wanted. In the dialysis patient, how you lower down the dose or same dose?
No, see what happens, volume dialysis, we remove fluid because mainly it is volume dependent. But sometimes there is intradialytic hypertension because of removal of fluid, RAS system gets activated. So I give ARNI upfront to prevent activation of RAS system and prevent intradialytic hypertension. So it's very useful. And most useful thing, as our chairperson said, that hyperkalemia, even with the use of MRAs, and same benefit we have with SGLT2 blockers also. Lastly, this DAPA, CKD and DAPA HF trials have shown no hyperkalemia with SGLT2 also. Same thing with ARNI.
Actually, two concerns.
Yes, Professor Guho. A quick shot.
Only one comment I want from Dr. Seth. Does it not produce any hyperkalemia, Arnie?
Because of
Or it is less than that of ACE inhibitors?
atrial natriuretic peptide, they produce natriuresis, they dilate efferent arterioles, they don't reduce GFR, so hyperkalemia is thing with SGLT2. So these RNA and SGLT2 new kids on the block are going to revolutionize the treatment of heart failure.
With the advent of newer potassium lowering drugs, the take-up of RNA and MRA will be far better in next year, I suppose. So let's hope for the best.
Yes, we're going to have Petitova.
May I ask Dr. Kollan Ganguly now to give the talk on this marquee situation, what DPP-4 inhibitor you will choose? Heart failure, kidney, this and that. Unmute, please, Kollan. Kollan, please unmute.
Yes. So thank you, Chairperson, sir. So there are so many known faces here, but I can't say even hello to anybody because I've got less than 8 minutes to talk and 20 seconds are gone. So my topic here is about choosing the right DPP-4 because there was no heart failure mentioned in this. So I've taken the liberty of going and broadening the spectrum. So you will see what I'm trying to say. So I think we all know that the treatment of diabetes has undergone a sea change from when we were medical students, when we were interns, and we're doing our PGTs, so to what it is now. So I'm going to first talk about the efficacy of DPP-4 inhibitors in Indians. So I'm going to build up the case why DPP-4 inhibitors have become so important in our diabetes management. And then I'm going to tell you about the HbA1c drop, hypoglycemia, and then the heart failure. So this is the impact of DPP-4 inhibitors on Asians. The dark one is Asians, and the light color one are Caucasians. You can clearly see that it causes much greater drop in HbA1c. And at the bottom, you can see Vilda and Sita has got nearly 1.5% drop in HbA1c, as opposed to half of that of the Caucasian population. There are a lot of theories about that, but that's beyond the scope of this talk. Now, what is the DPP-4 inhibition amongst the known DPP-4 inhibitors that we have at our disposal today? So the sitagliptin and vildagliptin have got the maximum DPP-4 inhibition of 95% or above, with Saxa 80 and Lena 80. At the end of their 24-hour dose, you still have more than 80% DPP-4 inhibition for Sita and Vilda, and about 70 for Saxa and Lena. However, teneligliptin has got much lower DPP-4 inhibition at 61% at 24 hours. So if you want to see DPP-4 selectivity, the activity, I think sitagliptin and vildagliptin have got bigger circles as opposed to the other, and teneligliptin has got the smallest one. Now, the very important issue about newly diagnosed diabetes, because things have changed. So I'm going to show you one small examples, a newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes with marked hyperglycemia, an executive frequent traveler, meaning erratic food habits, therefore at risk of hypoglycemia. And as hypoglycemia is we should avoid in patients with heart disease and with heart failure. So he has got an HbA1c of 10%, fasting up to 50. I had given this question to diabetologists in Kolkata and also in Hyderabad to know what they would treat. So 10 years ago, we would just close our eyes and start metformin and sulfonylurea. But look at the response. So this yellow is Kolkata and the white is Hyderabad. So majority of the doctors, diabetes doctors, would aim for a DPP-4 metformin combination. And why is that? Because if you start sulfonylurea, you have to get the patient back in 1 week because of high risk of hypoglycemia. Some people respond dramatically. So with the DPP-4 inhibitors, you can relax because it will drop the HbA1c, but no hypoglycemia. And how much drop of the HbA1c can we expect? So this is one study wherein vildagliptin and metformin was used. And in one group, they had an HbA1c of more than 11%. These are newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes. And the HbA1c drop was, lo and behold, 3.7%. So that is true for most of the DPP-4 inhibitors. For newly diagnosed diabetes with very high blood sugar levels, it can drop up to 3.5% with very minimal hypoglycemia. And that's why the DPP-4 inhibitor market has been flooded. Teneligliptin, I don't have much data to show. So this is the latest study, the VERIFY study. It is the longest and the largest study of the DPP-4 inhibitors, where vildagliptin was used in newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes for a period of 5 years. So newly diagnosed diabetes, either you use metformin or you use vildagliptin plus metformin. And what they showed, and Indian patients formed a bulk of the study. If you just use metformin, that's what we used to do, you are bound to have treatment failure within 1.5 years. But if you use a vildagliptin metformin combination, the treatment failure will be there at 5 years, mind you, with very minimal hypoglycemia. That's the important thing. That's what you should avoid in with patients with heart failure and patients with heart diseases. So newly diagnosed diabetes with marked hyperglycemia, I put big circles for all of them except teneligliptin because I don't have much data. Now, quickly going on to QTC interval, because this is very important. Now, a lot of drugs were discontinued from marketing. They only came to know after the drugs were marketing that they were causing QTC intervals. So FDA has got a clear guidance for any diabetes drug. So you have to divide, you have to have 4 groups of people. One, you give placebo. One, you give moxifloxacin because that causes QTC prolongation. So you know ECG machine is working properly. You give the drug in the therapeutic dose, and you give the drug in the supratherapeutic dose. Why supratherapeutic? Because I might take 2 tablets together by mistake. I may develop CKD. My drug levels might go up. I might have hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia itself causes QTC prolongation. That's why this is very important. And they define that the QTC outer interval should not cause 10 milliseconds. Now you can see with teneligliptin here, in the 160, the supratherapeutic dose, all of them cross 10. So this has to be less than 10, where my cursor is. It's the same as moxifloxacin. And even in the 40 milligram group, in the females, it crosses 10. But all the other DPP-4 inhibitors, so Sita, Vilda, Saxa, and linagliptin, they've used anywhere between 5 to 20 times the dose, no problem with the QTC interval. So overall, they are very safe drugs as far as QTC interval is concerned, except for teneligliptin. Now, the CVOT and heart failure. So these are the big trials. So this is MI, this is stroke, this is MI and stroke, and cardiovascular death. You can see it's all bang in the center. That's how safe and neutral these drugs are. And in the VERIFY trial, which I alluded to, newly diagnosed diabetes followed for 5 years, it was not a CVOT trial, and there weren't many patients who had events, but still the noise was in the right direction. So you have got about 30% reduction in CVOT, but it was statistically not significant, but noise in the right direction. And you have got vildagliptin does not have a CVOT, but you have got a meta-analysis of more than 17,000 patients of phase 3-4 trials, where it showed that it was right in the center, and as far as CVOT and as far as heart failure is concerned. So Chairperson, sir, I've got just 3 or 4 more slides, and I'll be quick. So with CVOT, you've got big circles for all these. And for Vilda, there is no dedicated CVOT, but you've got a 5-year data with VERIFY trial and more than 17,000 patients pooled with phase 3-4 data showing no worsening of CV outcome. This is the only trial of DPP-4 inhibitor in patients with heart failure, HFrEF, heart failure with reduced ejection fractions. You will not get any other DPP-4 data on patients with existing heart failure. This is the only one we have got. And what it showed that if you use vildagliptin, there was slight increase in the left ventricular end-diastolic and end-systolic volume, but there was no change in left ventricular ejection fraction, and there was no change in the BNP or in the symptomatology. The numbers were small, so there was slightly higher mortality in the vildagliptin group, but the ejection fraction did not increase. For the others, they're all in the center except for saxagliptin, which causes more of the heart failure. And if I take out omarigliptin, which is the once daily DPP-4 inhibitor, not in market yet, it is in the center, but only saxagliptin, which is away. My last two slides. So this is the data with linagliptin, where it shows patients with history of heart failure at baseline or no history of heart failure at baseline. With history of heart failure at baseline, there was no change in hospitalization of heart failure. With the TICO study, history of heart failure, yes. History of heart failure, no. No change in the CV outcome. So as far as DPP-4 inhibitors and heart failure, I think bigger circles for Lina and Saxa because they have got good dedicated trials. Smaller circle for Vilda, although they have got a dedicated trial for heart failure, and very small circles for Saxa and Teneli. Teneli doesn't have any, and Saxa showed adverse effects. So that's all, and I think I'll end here.
Thank you, Dr. Ganguly. Very precise and nice presentation. I think the heart failure Saxa dot would have been much lesser. Somehow there is something wrong in that. But I think that of the recent years, the linagliptin and sitagliptin had got a lot of market noise, but you have beautifully established vildagliptin as at par with all the other existing gliptins, excepting Teneli, which is far inferior. There is a very, very nice presentation. And only thing is that the compliance issue, vildagliptin twice daily, and now it is also by the makers, they are making it a once daily preparation of 100 milligram of vildagliptin OD preparation. So that small thorn in the rose will also go off. So it's just a minute comment from Dr. Shantanu Guha and Dr. Sukumar Ghosh.
Very good presentation and very nice seeing Kullan after a long time. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Okay, it is a
Dr.
very
Ghosh, can you?
Okay, it is a very knowledge gathering sessions of a cardiologist, I think so. So it is a very nice session and practically useful for practice. So very thank you to all.
Thank you. I think all the three speakers and the chairpersons have done an excellent job. So I take liberty to all of you to leave the session, giving a big thank to all of you and the organizing committee and scientific committee of EICON. Thank you.
Thank you.